and it's saying, congratulations on winning. And it goes right to the boat. It went from donuts and coffee to congratulations on winning. And it said the tracker, 18-foot boat, motor, and trailer. And my heart started pumping. I was like, oh boy, this is great. She said, I've got about 50 phone calls already today on this, people asking exactly the same thing. The old way was so much better. It's fun. It's hands, right?
CTV News speaking to Tim Hortons customer Glenn Howard there. Apparently one of the 500,000 customers across Canada that received an email from Tim Hortons, the coffee giant, saying that they had won a boat and a trailer worth just about $65,000. It's a roll up the disappointment over at Tim Hortons. And now, of course, there is talk of a class action lawsuit. In fact, one has been filed. Joey Zukran is a class action attorney specializing in consumer rights and over at LPC Avocats, and they are pursuing this Tim Hortons class action lawsuit. Joey, welcome back to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
So, maybe you've probably been on this page. I was sort of saying, mistakes happen. And then I read on the Tim Hortons You Won a Boat Facebook group, story of this woman, Ashley Anderson. And she said, I'm completely embarrassed. I had to call up all of my family back to tell them I hadn't won the boat. And she goes into a really big sob story about her husband and him having a boat that they were trying to fix up, all this kind of stuff. Joey, what's your reaction here? What was your reaction when you heard about this?
Yeah, and she's not the only one. Elias, I had the same reaction as you. I said, mistakes happen. It could be an error. But in Quebec civil law, there's a concept of inexcusable error. You have to go back, 2 points I have to make. First, you have to go back to last year when Tim Hortons had a very similar situation where dozens, if not hundreds of people were told and thought that they won the $10,000 prize, for them to only learn later that, it was an error. Second year in a row, something similar happens. It becomes, in my view, inexcusable. And there's case law in Quebec that says when there's a professional seller, they should have, like Tim Hortons, they should have safeguards in place to make sure that these type of errors don't happen again and again and again. Now, when I saw the ad, and initially my client called me, said, I want a boat. There's thousands of people in my situation. When I saw the ad, it's inexcusable. It literally tells you, it shows you a picture of the boat, says you won, congratulations, and it lasted for about 6 to 7 or 8 hours in some cases. I thought the case was worth taking on. There's a Supreme Court case called Richard v. Time where there was something similar, the old sweepstakes cases, where people thought they won a significant amount of money prize, and they ended up getting a significant award of punitive damages. I took on the case. I think the error is inexcusable, and I think Tim Hortons has to honor the written, by the way, which is what the Quebec Consumer Protection Act says, is that a merchant has to, written statements made by a merchant are binding, and you cannot contract out of that by way of fine print and terms and conditions. I like the case. I took it on. My client wants his boat. Okay,
so if 500,000 people got this email, and the boat costs, $68,000. I heard that ranges everywhere I look, 64, 68. We're talking, if Tim Hortons had to give everyone a boat that they got this email, that's $34 billion, right? So I think that would be tough here. What's reasonable on the punitive aspect here? What is a reasonable way to give a value to whatever 4, 5, 8 hours of anguish where you think you won and you didn't?
Yeah, so I don't think the total value is, effective. I think their market cap is something like $13 billion. So it would effectively either they have a really good insurance or they might have a real problems. But I don't think the total value of the claim is what the court will look at. Now, in terms of, I think they'll look at whether or not there was a written representation made and whether or not it has to be honored. In terms of punitive component, we're asking $10,000 per member because I think that's one of the areas where the case will focus because Tim Hortons is a repeat offender. In that Richard v. Time case, the Supreme Court awarded $15,000, so we're in the ballpark range of what's reasonable. And again, at the end of the day, did they promise people a boat? You mentioned the story of Miss Anderson. There's the story of my client as well. Dozens of other stop stories. I am in that Facebook group, and we're following attentively the Tim Hortons You Want a Boat Group 2024, which has now more than 2.6 thousand members. I think it's unfair. I think they have to pay up. and that's why I took on the case. Obviously, it'll be up to a judge to decide whether the case has merit. But we think it has a good case, especially under the Quebec Consumer Protection Act.
Now, Joey, Tim Hortons roll up the rim to win used to be a physical, real world experience, right? You'd go to Tim's, you get a cup of coffee, and then you would literally roll up the rim. And underneath that rim, it was printed right there in the cup. You win, you lose. Okay. In fact, I know someone who won a car. He won a hybrid Camry. This is like 15 years ago. Won the car, right, by rolling up the rim. Okay. And it seems nowadays, because everything's digital, it's just an easy cop-out. Oh, sorry, glitch. And I wonder if this was in real life, they were still doing it the other way, and 500,000 cups were printed with "You win the boat" stamped in the cup. Would that change things here? Does the digital aspect of this provide companies with more of an out on these glitches?
So you raise a couple of good points. We've all thrown that number 500,000 out there because that's the number of people that were apparently won the subscription to the Atlantic, and from what the common denominator seems to be, people who want a subscription to the Atlantic being told they want a boat. Now, what this case will bring to light is whether these odds or the figures that Tim Hortons are projecting are, number one, accurate. I'm not so convinced they are, but only time will tell. But the reason why I'm not convinced is because they're saying 500,000, but there's only 2,500 people in that Facebook group. I thought it would be much more, but time will tell whether we're accurate on that. And second of all, I think the digital component doesn't give them a way out. I think it holds them more liable because that's what, there's the case I was citing was a British Airways case earlier on where the court said, there was an airline, if you make a pricing error on a flight from Montreal to London and you're British Airways, guess what? You cannot come out and say, oh, error, human error. You have to have safeguards in place to ensure that such errors don't happen. And when you're doing something as serious as a roll up the rim campaign on a national basis and you're rolling it out to millions, tens of millions of people, you better make sure that you get it right. And if you get it wrong 2 years in a row, you're going to have to pay, certainly on the punitive component, and that's why my client took this case. And he wants to hold them accountable. At the end of the day, obviously he's asking the court to order specific performance, which means please deliver me my boat. But otherwise, he's alternately asking for compensatory damage equivalent to the value of the boat, plus, of course, the punitive component.
Well, Joey,
the purpose of which is to deter merchants from being nonchalant and ignorant and negligent in these type of campaigns.
Joey, I got to tell you something. There's anger on the text line. I got palpable anger over this case because I think people are very frustrated with stories like this. Keep us abreast of the situation, Joey. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
That's Joey Zukran from LPC Avocats. It's the firm pursuing this Tim Hortons class action.